So Justice League is an interesting film for the DCEU, because after the disappointing critical response to the darker first 3 entries, and then the amazing critical response to the much lighter Wonder Woman, this movie now has to take those other characters and fit them into this new DC world. Plus, this movie had lots of reshoots with a different director, and with this being one of the most anticipated superhero films of all time, and with this basically being DC's answer to the Avengers, this film has a lot riding on it. So, now that it's arrived, let's talk about it.
Alright. I don't recognize this world.
And as usual, the first part of this review will be no spoilers, and then later on, I'll get into the spoilers after a big warning. So, nothing will be ruined for you here. So, this film has received a pretty bad critical reception so far. Not as bad as some, but not very good either. And do I agree with that? Well, brace yourselves, because this is going to be one of those rare BHL disagrees with what most people think about a film videos. Normally, I'm pretty in line with what most people think, but with Justice League, I actually quite enjoyed it. It's not perfect by a long stretch, but for a lot of reasons, including some pretty subjective and personal ones, which we'll get into later, I had a good fun time with this. But let's start with the main stuff. Firstly, the cast and characters. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but for the most part, pretty great. I still really like Ben Affleck as Batman, and this version of Batman is great. There are some moments where he has one-liners, like Whedon, Tony Stark type one-liners, which is kind of weird coming from Batman. But if you took those few out, this is exactly how I want to see Batman in this world. Gal Gadot isn't as good as she was in Wonder Woman, but she's still pretty great. I really liked Ezra Miller as Barry Allen. He's very charismatic, and he's clearly giving it his all. Personally, I don't think the lines he was given were that funny, but we'll get into that more later. I did enjoy his performance though, and he did sell some of those lines. Jeremy Irons is still good as Alfred, Jason Momoa is good as Aquaman, I guess, though he wasn't the standout that I was kinda hoping he would be. His character just didn't have as much to him as I was hoping. I didn't really get a sense for him, except the film really wanted you to think that he was a badass. Like, look, he's drinking beer in slow-mo with rock music, and he's a bit of a rebel and a skeptic, but that's about it. And Ray Fisher was fine as Cyborg, though I didn't really like his character. We'll get into that more in the negatives, but his character didn't make a ton of sense sometimes. There are other talented actors who are in this film for like 2 seconds. Amy Adams, Diane Lane, Billy Crudup, Amber Heard, J.K. Simmons. They're good, but they really don't get much to do. Especially Simmons. I was hoping there'd be more of him, but you've more or less seen all of him in the trailers. Also, if you're wondering what I thought about the other League member who returns here, we'll talk about that in the spoiler section. Really, with the core team, although a few times it felt a tad forced, I did enjoy the interactions between them. Like, the chemistry here is pretty solid. As far as the action and visual effects, when they're great, they're really great. And when they're bad, they're pretty awful. Like, some action is really cool, especially the Flash's stuff. I just love that kind of super speed effect. But sometimes with other action, it gets a little too slow-mo-y and too CGI, like these DC films tend to do. And with the visual effects, again, there are some here that are incredible. And then there are some that are insanely bad. Especially some green screen. I understand that they had to reshoot a lot of this, but my god. What is this? Anyway, this is supposed to be the good stuff. This movie also takes a very sharp turn with the DC universe. This feels like a totally different world than the one we saw a bit over a year ago in BVS. Batman doesn't kill, he doesn't use machine guns, and generally, the world is so much lighter and much more MCU-style kid-friendly. It feels much more like the DC world that I know and love, from especially the animated shows and some of the comics, which I really enjoyed. I know some people love the way darker stuff, but personally, I felt like this fit much better, especially with all these new characters being introduced. Generally, because this world is so much lighter and more colorful and all that, this movie is a lot more fun than the others, and that's what I can say about this. Overall, it's a fun time. It's not an amazing work of art, it's just an easy-to-watch, enjoyable film. It does feel a little cluttered sometimes, because this was effectively made by 2 different people, and those styles do clash a little bit. Like, if you're looking for it, you can definitely see the stuff that's more Snyder and the stuff that's more Whedon, but it's not insanely distracting. The fun still sticks out for the most part. Also, quick little thing, I really love the music. A lot of it is just the standard superhero movie music we get these days, but sometimes it adapts a version of an old superhero theme, and that just added a lot to this feeling of this being a proper DC world, and I don't know, I guess I haven't really seen something like that before, and I thought it was really cool. Now, one of the main reasons that I like this film more than just, oh yeah, it's a decent fun time, is a much more personal reason that I don't think as many people can relate to. So this part is more just me explaining why I like this film a little more than most people probably will. Like I've said maybe a million times on this channel, I grew up watching the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated shows, and I absolutely love them to this day. And with this film, this is going to be a positive for some people and a negative for some people, but for me, I really enjoyed it. it really felt like that world from the Justice League cartoon. This movie felt like a really long live-action episode of JLU, and as someone who loves that, and just these DC characters in general, I kinda love that. From dialogue, to action, to pacing, to how characters act, to just sound effects. This felt a bit like a cartoon, and it just reminded me so much of that show that I liked that part. Now, it does make the film a little weird, because while that works great for a cartoon, for an actual film, it can be a little strange. Like, there are some very cheesy lines, and the pacing is kinda off, so I totally get why people wouldn't really gravitate towards this. But I just thought it was super cool to see. Maybe I'm a bit of a hypocrite, because that dream sequence in BVS, and the Flash coming through and all that, a lot of DC fans probably loved that, and I hated it. But I hated that because I felt like it really didn't fit. Here, I felt like the DC references actually did fit, and I liked that. I did see this with a few friends, some of whom aren't big comic book or DC fans, and they were a little confused at points, so I get why that could be a negative. And I can get why even a super DC comic fan wouldn't like this because of the problems that I'll get into in a second. But this is a subjective review, and personally, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And that's why I think I was more positive coming out of this than a lot of people are. It's not the only good thing about this film, and it doesn't excuse the bad, but it did elevate it a bit for me. Very personal, I know, so don't take that as you will definitely love this film. And on that note, now let's talk about the bad stuff here. Because again, there is some stuff that really drags this film down. Firstly, there are just some stupid moments that make no sense, or are very confusing. No spoilers, but I'll say, when Aquaman first meets Batman, I was like, what is happening? How does he know that? Why did he just say, okay, it's done? Just saying, there's some weird, contrived moments in here that I feel like very easily could have been fixed. The plot for me is the biggest letdown in this film, for a lot of reasons. Structurally, it's pretty bad. You can tell a lot of this has been reshot. Towards the start of this film especially, it's very choppy and poorly paced. Like, it gets straight into it right away, and then just bounces from location to location, from character to character, trying to jam as much information down your throat as possible. It doesn't show certain characters' personalities very well, or cleverly, or how they know certain things. It moves around very quickly. This also leads to some people's personalities and motivations being really confusing, especially with Cyborg. A lot of moments with him just felt rushed and not earned. The film's also very predictable. It follows your standard superhero movie formula of team comes together, then they have a bit of a fight, then there's a big CGI battle with hundreds of enemies. You see most of the stuff coming a mile away. And considering how groundbreaking this year's been for superhero films, that is a bit disappointing. It just feels more generic. After some really creative and new stuff this year, this is just an average superhero film. Also, I'll just say it. The villain in this kinda sucks. The most generic, non-threatening, cookie-cutter villain you can think of. Basically, generic villain, generic plot, generic final battle. The plot somehow manages to both be formulaic and not make a ton of sense at the same time. Something else, and this is more the fault of the previous DC films, I guess, but I really don't buy the relationships some of these characters have, in particular Batman to Superman. Like when Superman died in the animated show, and yes I am going back to that, Batman comes to talk at his grave, or memorial, and that's emotional and believable, because these two have known each other for a long time and are great friends. Here, Batman wanted to kill Superman for a while, then they made up and were friends for like an hour, and then Superman died. So sure, I guess Batman wants Superman back to save the day, but I didn't buy that he had like a real emotional feeling of guilt. Like I said, some visual effects and green screen aren't great. This film is much lighter, but I didn't find it particularly funny. Like, there were a few moments where I chuckled, but nothing actually made me laugh out loud. Except for one thing I'll mention in spoilers. Now, here at the end, just two specific things. One, there are a lot of really cheesy, kind of stupid lines in this film, and some of those I enjoyed in that kind of cartoony way, but some were just kind of eye-roll worthy. Like, one I remember specifically is at one point Batman's like, "This wasn't the plan," and Alfred's like, "No, this is the team." I don't know, there were some moments that were just too corny. And two, and again, this is a small thing, and maybe it doesn't happen as much as I felt like it did, but it seems like Batman just tells everyone his secret identity in this film. Or, like, everyone just knows it immediately, and there isn't really a big reveal or anything. It felt to me a bit like that running joke from How It Should Have Ended.
Hey, I'm Batman. You wanna know my secret identity?
So before I get into the spoilers, I'll wrap this part up. All in all, I quite like Justice League, and I can understand why some people might totally disagree. I just want to say, I really hate it when directors and actors say, "Oh, this film is just for the fans. If you don't like this, you're not a real fan." That's ridiculous. With this film, I think you can still have a fun time with it if you're not a fan of DC. But if you are a fan of DC, I imagine you're really going to like it. Again, if you don't like this film, it doesn't mean you're not a real fan of DC. It just means you didn't like the film. It does have some bad stuff in it, and plot-wise, it's quite weak, and it's not nearly as groundbreaking as the other superhero films this year. But personally, I had a way better time with this than I thought I would, and I think it's worth checking out. I'll give Justice League a 7.8 out of 10. Okay, now we're getting to the spoilers. If you don't want anything ruined, click off now. Okay, firstly, the return of Superman. I actually really liked that. Well, I liked some of it. What I did like is, once Superman does really fully come back, this is the best representation of Superman we've seen in a long time. And I say that having not seen Supergirl yet. He's full of hope, he's cheesy as hell. I'd love to see more of this Superman going forward. What I didn't like is, one, there is some distracting mustache removal here that makes his face look a little unsettling at points. Also, I'm not sure if it was intended to be funny, but if not, that slow motion turn that Superman does to the Flash was unintentionally very hilarious. And two, I am so over this trope of a character dying and then coming back to life but being slightly different or evil or out of control, and then being brought back to their normal selves because of some emotional experience. I really don't want to see that again. Please. As far as other things, that flashback sequence with all the DC characters kind of coming together was one of those moments where I thought, I would be kind of lost if I wasn't a huge fan of this stuff, but as a huge fan, I'm loving this. Some Green Lanterns even pop up? I don't know, I wasn't expecting that, and I thought it was really cool. And then there were the two end credit scenes. First one, Flash and Superman having a race to see who is the fastest man alive, which they've been known to do before. That was fun, plus we got some more hilarious Cavill face. And then there's the second one, where Lex Luthor is talking to Deathstroke about forming the Injustice Gang, or the Legion of Doom, or something like that. That was pretty great. As much as I didn't like Eisenberg in BVS, he seemed more toned down here. Deathstroke looks really cool. And I love the idea of this Injustice Gang in this DC world. Possibly for the upcoming Batman film. It would have been even cooler if there were other villains there, like maybe Leto's Joker, but this was still pretty awesome. Really, I just left this film really excited to see these characters in this universe going forward. So, those are my thoughts on Justice League. What did you think of this? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, check out this podcast about movies and TV and whatnot I do every other Friday with a friend of mine. It's called the Poorly Planned Podcast, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.